Coffee making montage. Yeah. Coffee stuff. Oh yeah. Woo, coffee. Coffee making machine. Oh my god, doing this one hand is hard. Sounds at all. Jeez. That's totally necessary, by the way. How am I supposed to knock it? Damn it! Basket. Close it up. Turn it on. Coffee. Be brewed already! Oh yes. Oh yes. What's shaking, guys? Been working hard on a bunch of projects. Total production crunch, so I got a bit of a production week crunch fuzz going on here. And naturally, because everything is crazy and I've got too much going on, I got sick. It's a weird sort of low-level, flu-ish kind of crap energy during the day kind of thing. Anyways, what you just heard is a little bit from some stuff I'm doing for a series called Necessary Evil. Super fun, fantastical comedy. Office Space meets the seventh level of Hades. Anyways, I had a great time writing some fun orchestral stuff for that. For this too, there's a bit of a percussive track that I created from office sounds because of the nature of the show. So let me just play a little bit from that. You'll just hear the office stuff. So things like staplers and what else is going on there? Copiers, fax machines, all sorts of crazy stuff. And that sounds a bit like this. Cool stuff. It's lots of fun playing around with that. So I thought I'd share with you guys a quick little production technique for working on orchestral stuff. Oftentimes when we're working on a project, you need to create arrangements and stuff really quickly because you're working under a time crunch, time pressure. And this is a little trick that I actually got from another composer, Stefan Andrews, who works on a lot of the My Little Pony shows. And he showed this trick to me many years ago and I thought it was super useful. Really simple trick. So you're basically pre-orchestrating something. In this case, you're dealing with the bass material in an orchestral kind of setting. And what you want to do is you want to kind of create something in the basses or in the lower section where you're trying to remain sort of consistent with this idea of low interval limits, which means you don't want a lot of dense information at the bottom end of your sound spectrum because that creates that really muddy kind of tone. What you want is really nice, precise, clean, clear, direct bass lines. So you can help yourself along both in the writing process and sort of instantly orchestrating by linking a bunch of instruments that would normally be doubling or doubling each other in octaves. So in this case what I've done is I've doubled up low strings, so the basses and the cello. I've also hooked up the timpani. I've hooked up the trombones and the tuba all onto one linked patch, so they're basically all playing together. And now I can do stuff like this. So you can see that's a really quick way of writing something almost instantly. And instead of reorchestrating, then you're sort of in advance sort of choosing the doublings or the octave doublings that you're going to have in that. And then that helps you sort of write, get creative. The cool thing about this is that with the velocity, it really changes a lot about the character and the flavor of each of those hits if you do it really softly. getting a bit of that low timp and a bit more of the cello and the bass, and then when you really hit it, you're getting a bit more of that bite out of the trombones and the tuba, which is great. So another fun little mini project I'm working on right now is some audio, sound design, and music for a Toronto game company called Z-Mind. And it's for a new two-player card game that they've created called Uncaged. So I created some sort of retro gaming kind of stuff, sort of the 90s console games, 90s arcade game sort of reference there with that retro sound. And then I did the sound design for it as well. And I was reminded of some very basic sound design rules which apply to orchestration, which apply to really everything. And that's this idea of how to create really, really big sounds. I think the counterintuitive idea is that if you think about something really big in terms of a sound, you think of more and more things happening, like an avalanche or a huge explosion. And if you just kept adding and adding and adding to that, like more bombs, more avalanche, more, you know, a mountain falling in and volcano erupting, that this sound would just get bigger and bigger. But the problem is that that doesn't work in terms of audio, in terms of the way that you're working in these productions. There is a limit to how much stuff you can actually push into those tiny little boxes and what they'll actually reproduce in the end. So the trick in this is kind of an illusion where you pull out certain things just before and during the action or the main big hit that happens. In this case, what's happening is I have the sounds of big punches, big hits. So one thing that I'm doing is I'm avoiding having any big hits in the music, so big bass hits or big kick drum hits or anything happening in the music is not happening at the same time that there's a big hit in the sound design. And the other thing is, wherever there is a huge moment in the sound design where I'm letting that take over for that time, I'm pulling the music down. I'm ducking that music out for that moment. So it feels like in the end you almost don't notice that there's this ducking because something else replaces it almost immediately. But what you're simply doing is refocusing from, here's the music, I want that to be the focus here because it's an emotional kind of driver of the scene, but then here's this big hit because it's important for this moment in the scene, and that sort of takes over on the emotional storytelling for that quick moment. So here's a quick little example. Basically what I've done there is all those big moments and punches, I'm ducking the music right out and it almost goes away. The psychological impact of this is that because you've established that there's music in this piece and you've established where it's going, it's like that little trick that Bobby McFerrin did on the stage from Ted where he went da 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 and everyone knows what the next note is, da 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 da, because it's the major scale and everyone kind of intuitively knows what the next step is. So you establish something and people just know that it continues. And then you could pull it out for those big moments so that orally, in terms of your sonic spectrum, you have enough space to play with and insert something else that's just going to take over from that moment. So this is from an upcoming library of production music that I'm doing for hard music design. And this is a collaboration with Caleb White, aka Shando. You might know him from SoundCloud. His SoundCloud account, he's doing quite well on there. Really cool EDM producer. And those are the vocal stylings of Steph Copeland. Amazing stuff. Really excited about this library. One of the things we'll be delivering to the end client, and this is what you find a lot of times if you're doing production more, is that they want the stems. So these are breakouts of all the aspects of the production so that if they need to, say, strip out something or create a submix of something very simple for a specific production or an editor that wants something really particular for their production, they can do that. They have sort of a much broader available set of options that they can use. If you ever find yourself working on these kinds of productions, there's a few things to keep in mind that will help you hopefully get licensed more often than not. One of the big things, not checking your stems individually. Oftentimes things can get lost inside a track if you're doing a big mix and everything's just one big thing, but you're not paying attention to that guitar track or that percussion track where the crossfade wasn't quite right and there's a little click or maybe you didn't end something with a nice fade out, or there's some sort of screwy little thing in there that you weren't paying attention to at the time because it's all lost in the bigness of the mix. But when it comes down to the stems, and especially when an editor is going into those stems and doing a very spare submix that just sits perfectly under some dialogue, then all of these problems really come to the forefront, and you're going to really shoot yourself in the foot if you haven't paid extra special care to make sure that all your stems are really nice and clean and really perfect. Another thing to keep in mind is what is useful separation. Like when you're thinking about your tracks and how you're stemming out, what are the useful things for an editor to work with? One of the big ones is percussion tracks versus drum tracks. You really want, if you have an interesting percussion track that can stand on its own, and that is useful separately from the drum track, it's really useful to have that separated out as opposed to just throwing all your perc and all your drums onto one track, because then they can't do a really stripped down kind of version of that same track. Again, when you're looking at your tracks all the way through, in a mixed situation, it's fine for something to drop out completely. Sometimes in stems you want to cover that to make sure that your guitar part does have something going on at all times, so that if you do submixes, you don't necessarily have this massive dropout because you've taken away one element, like let's say the bass goes away and you've lost everything else. Effects. Any kind of special effect that you have, whether it's a percussion effect or a vocal effect like chopping, anything that's very glitchy or very particular or stands out and is necessarily a hook, like it sounds really cool in your track, definitely put that on its own stem. You might think it's the coolest thing in the world, but when it comes to an editor, their taste might differ from yours, and they might also want to put together something that will sit underneath a dialogue track or a voiceover, and then you've got a real problem. You've got this really hooky, cool sounding thing that just pokes out of the mix too much. If they don't have control over that and can't take that out, you might lose an opportunity to have something licensed. So there's just a few quick handy tips. Hopefully those are helpful for you guys when you are working on your own music, and we'll see you guys in the next one.